Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Afiq bin Shamsul Fazli. So today me and my other group members will be discussing about how does copyright protect the rights of its owner. So my discussion would compromise about the author, owner and also joint ownership. So before we get into details, firstly I would like to explain who is the law protecting, the owner or the author. So in brief, the author means the person that creates the work within his own efforts and by expressing his own creative work, whereas the owner is the person having the copyright of the work. For instance, to help understand this a little better, let's say if an author writes a book by using his own words, efforts, and creative ideas, but decided to sell the work to a publishing company for them to sell the work to the public as they would attain better engagement with the readers and would gain more profits through their way of marketing, meaning that in this case, the copyright of the work would be transferred initially from the author to the publishing company, which means that the publishing company is the owner of the work. In other terms, it would also be called as commission work. The route to understand this term is to take a look at our Copyright Act 1987, Section 26, Subsection 1 and Section 26, Subsection 2, whereby it mentions that initially the author would be the copyright owner of the work. However, under Section 26, Subsection 2, Paragraph A, it could be seen that if a person other than the author commissioned the work by way of contract of service, apprenticeship, or during the course of author's employment, then the copyright owner of the work will be transferred to the other party that commissioned the work. So it might seem confusing at first. So let's go back to the main rule regarding copyright, in which copyright is actually a movable property. Copyright is actually a movable property, meaning that if the work is commissioned by other parties, and even though that party did not provide a substantial part into creating that work, however, that person can still be transferred the rights and will be deemed as the rightful copyright owner of the work. This can be best illustrated in the case of Syed Ahmad bin Jamal against Datuk Bandar Kuala Lumpur, whereby the court made it clear that Syed Ahmad bin Jamal, as the person creating the design for the sculpture of Puncak Purnama, is the author of the design, but however he was commissioned to create the design of the sculpture by UMBC Harta Sidian Berhad, which makes UMBC Harta Sidian Berhad the rightful copyright owner of the work. However, it is also should be noted regarding the transfer of the work, that it is subjected to the agreement between both of the parties, meaning that both of the parties could decide whether the transfer is excluded or there are certain limitations being made. For instance, this could be seen in the case of Wedding Galore Sidian Berhad against Rasda Ahmad, whereby it was mentioned by the court that although the respondent was commissioned by the wedding couple to take photographs, however, in the invoice, it was expressly clear enough in the terms and conditions applied that says the photographs taken during the wedding day is in fact the respondent's intellectual property. This agreement excludes the copyright owner being transferred from the respondent, which is the photographer, to the client that commissioned him. For the next part, adding on, there's also another term established in copyright whereby if the work was made by more than one author, which is called the joint authorship doctrine. So the huge question that arises every time there's a discussion regarding joint authorship doctrine is who owns the copyright of the work? So before answering the question literally, we must understand what constitutes a work to be regarded as joint authorship in depth. So we can refer to Section 3 of the Copyright Act 1987, which defines work of joint authorship as a work collaborated by two or more authors, which the contribution of each author is not separable from the other authors. Two parts could be derived from this interpretation, whereby the first part is there needs to be two or more authors, and the second part is it must be an inseparable contribution. So the first part is, I would say, it is quite easy to understand, but the second part is a little bit complex, whereby the statute is trying to say that, for instance, if a book is written solely by an author and another author only writes a substantial paragraph or chapter, then that wouldn't be regarded as joint authorship, as the work is not an inseparable condition. So if it's still confusing, the case of Najma Heptullah against Orion Longman Limited and others 1989 would help understand it a little bit clearer, whereby it was mentioned by the court that a person could be seen as joint author if he contributes substantially in the creation of the work, and not just by producing a copy of someone else's work. Hence, in regards of joint authorship, the authors will be considered as owners of the copyright work. Therefore, it is material to know whether a person could be regarded as an author or the owner of the work to establish their rights to the work that was created, which will be discussed in the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Hi everyone, my name is Nurdini Adriana and now I'll be continuing on what Afi has showed us just now with rights of copyright owners recognized in Malaysia. So before we move on, we need to first know what is copyright, right? So according to the Copyright Act of 1987, copyright is the exclusive authority or right to manage creative works produced by the author, the copyright owner, and the performer for a given time, and I'll explain this as we go along. Now that we know what is copyright, we can further go to the next question, which is what are the works eligible for copyright? So talking about the works, the duration of copyright is fixed for each category of works, as I've previously mentioned, for a given time in the definition, right? So as for literary, musical, and artistic works, which are the ones in yellow, generally speaking, this group of copyright works refers to people who will live for as long as the author does, plus an additional 50 years after his or her passing. So basically, the duration of copyright for these three is lifetime plus 50 years. And as for films and sound recordings, this category includes the works of a performer. So these copyright work categories must continue to exist 50 years from the publication of the works, and it is established in a fixation for the film and sound recording. And the copyright work for the performer, as I mentioned earlier, to include in it, must come from the actual performances of their fixation in a sound recording. And as for broadcast, the one in red, the period of 50 years for the copyright in broadcast which occurred in the method of transmission by wire or wireless should be reckoned from the day the broadcast was first made. So basically, films, sound recordings, and broadcasts have the same duration of copyright. And as for derivative works, it refers to a copyrighted work that comes from another copyrighted work. The duration of copyright is also lifetime plus 50 years. So as you can see on the slide, there are three types of rights, which are legal, economic, and moral. Since legal and moral rights are more or less the same, here we would like to distinguish on how are they different, hence why we put it side by side. So for legal rights, so the copyright law grants an exclusive right to control to the author, copyright owner, and performer. So they are granted legal rights, including the ability to defend their copyright works in situations of infringement by civil or criminal actions. Actions taken, the criminal prosecution is handled by either the Royal Malaysian Police or the Enforcement Division of the Ministry of Domestic Trade, Cooperative and Consumerism, known as NTDCC. And as for moral rights, more or less the same. Two types of rights under moral rights, which are paternity and integrity. And the paternity, with these rights, the author is able to claim the creation's originality rights. And under integrity, enables the author to stop users from distorting, mutilating, or altering his works that would materially damage the original composition and detrimental to the author's honor or reputation. As for economic rights, the economic rights granted to right holders include the right to reproduce, the right to communicate with the public, the right to perform, present, or play for an audience, the right to distribute, and the right to rent out commercial space to do their work, right? So during the period of protection defined by the Copyright Act of Copyright Act 1987, certain rights may be exercised. These economic rights enable the owner of the rights to profit financially from the consumer's business usage of the creator's works. Whatever that they produce, they can make profit from it. Economic rights may be transferred by licensing, willful disposal, or assignment. What happens when there is copyright infringements? Whoever uses any copyrighted works without consent or authorization from either the author, copyright owner, and performer, it may constitute as an infringement under Copyright Act 1987, which is the act that we're referring to. And amongst the act of infringement includes reproduction in any metric form, performs, shows, or play, distributing it to the public, imports any article into Malaysia for the purpose of trade or financial gains, make profit from any infringing copies, and these are only a few of them. If you do any of this, it may constitute to an infringement under the Act, and action can be taken upon you. And that's it from me. I'll pass the floor to Irfan.
Alright, so there are obviously many significances to the copyright protection under copyright laws, and it is important to note that copyright is an essential component of the modern educational experience, as it promotes the progress of science and useful arts. Through this way, creators can express their work freely without feeling exposed or vulnerable. So moving on to the first importance of copyright protection is that copyright is important as it helps to protect the work of authors, artists, musicians, academic researchers, or basically anyone in general, by rewarding the creator of the work the ability to protect it from unlicensed or uncredited usage. And the types of works in question that I'm talking about here are the works mentioned by Sister Dini earlier. Secondly, this also leads to the prevention of their work being copied to the degree where others cannot benefit from it by selling it or receiving credit for it. So this basically means that the rightful credit will be given to the original creator of the work. Through this way, copyright will protect the creative work against theft. The original creators will receive the benefit of the economic rewards, and the public receives the benefit of the creative works. Last but not least, copyright protection also fosters intellectual creativity, as it provides an incentive for a creator to work freely, advocate people to create creatively, but at the same time allowing them to gain recognition for their work, as well as protecting their livelihoods. If there is no copyright protection, people might not want to create anymore, because there is no sense of security to protect their own work. But it is important to also note that all works are copyright, but not all copyrighted works are made available. This means that copyright law imposes no obligation upon creators to make their copyrighted work available, but an unpublished work that is never distributed to the public can receive the same copyright protection that a published work would receive. So what would happen if there are no copyright protection? If there are no copyright protection under the copyright law, this can give rise to many issues, and some of them are like plagiarism, where one would turn in someone else's work as their own work, and then we also have copyright infringement, where one would create merchandise for sale which features copyrighted words and images. Thirdly, piracy is one of the issue, and a prime example of this is downloading illegal music on the internet. And lastly, counterfeits, where basically it involves luxury products being counterfeited, being duplicated into something of a lower quality and sold at a lower price. There are obviously other issues out there, and these terms are very broad, but these four terms that I mentioned today, they can also be used interchangeably depending on the situation. But I would like to just point out that this is the reason why copyright laws are important, so that issues like these can be enforced and can be prevented. There is no denying that Malaysia can be considered as fortunate to have a very strong copyright protection laws, and the most commonly known and primary legislation pertaining to this is obviously the Copyrights Act 1987. There are also other laws created to protect copyrights in Malaysia, which is Industrial Designs Act 1996, and also its regulations 1999, which protects industrial designs, and apart from that, there are also the Trademarks Act 2019, which deals with matters pertaining to trademark. These other relevant authorities, though, govern a more detailed issue along the broad spectrum of copyright. Now, if we were to look at a global scale, Malaysia is actually a part of 3 international copyright agreements. which is one, we are a member country of the Berne Convention for Copyright. Two, we are part of the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, also known as TRIPS, and also World Intellectual Property Organization, also known as WIPO Copyright Treaty. And the Copyright Index operates in Malaysia under international copyright agreements and is recognized in countries all around the world as a copyright authority providing official copyright registration. And Malaysia's involvement at an international level further strengthened its recognition of copyright laws. This comes to show that Malaysia really does advocate on the importance of copyright laws for its people. However, there are also countries across the globe that either do not apply copyright laws or the copyright laws that they have are very limited. For example, Eritrea, Turkmenistan, and San Marino, which are said by the US Copyright Office to have no copyright protection either for authors within their borders or for foreign workers. As you can see from the table that I've prepared here, none of these countries actually possess a local copyright laws in their own individual countries. These three countries do have a similarity though, whereby any work that originates in these countries must be in the public domain or available under a free license. Before I pass it on to Raouf, I just want to say that it is very important that the general public are made aware of copyright laws and the significance that come along with it. That's all from me, thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdul Rauf bin Abdul Bari, the third presenter of this group. Now I will continue on presenting the significance of the right of ownership toward the society. As been discussed previously, basically there are three types of ownership, namely the legal right, the economic right, and lastly the moral right. Here we will look into the significance and the relation of those rights from the view of social development goal at the SDG and the view of Maqasid Sharia. As you can see on the slide, in general, the SDG is a part of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 in providing a shared blueprint of peace and prosperity for the people. Meanwhile, the Maqasid Sharia is the general objective of Islamic legislation, which consists of the deeper meaning and the inner aspect of wisdom by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in areas and circumstances of legislation. Moving on to the next slide, now we will look into the Maqasid Sharia. When we conducted our studies in this topic, we find out that there are two elements of Maqasid Sharia which are relevant to the ownership right. First, the protection of property, the hifzul of mal, and second, the protection of dignity. In terms of the protection of mal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned in the Surah Al-Baqarah verse 88, as in general, it is a part of Sharia to preserve our property from others. So basically, preserving property means protecting belonging or asset from destruction and from transferring property into the hand of others in an unlawful way, including injustice, denying rights, and so on. So here, the intellectual property is protected by Copyright Act 1987 and by means of legal right, economic right, and also the moral rights. Generally speaking, this right had fulfilled the Maqasid Sharia in protection of property, hifzul al-mal, as it protects the subject matter from being taken illegally by others. Now, moving on to the second element of Maqasid Sharia, which is the protection of dignity, we can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned this element in the Surah Al-Isra verse 70. As in general, it can be said that the term of dignity is not limited only to the protection of progeny such as nasab, lineage, and so on, but somehow it may have a bigger view as in the perspective of the copyright law itself. In the context of protection of dignity toward the intellectual property, it means that the protection of good name and reputation. Here, without the right ownership, people can easily claim other works as to claim it belongs to them. If these three rights does not exist, which is the economic rights, legal rights, and the moral rights, it will kill the good reputation of the right owner, as all his effort and hard work of the work will be credited to the person who illegally claimed it. Now, moving on to these slides, We will look into the relevance of ownership right into the extent of the social development goal. Here, the relevant SDG would be the SDG 4 of the quality of education. To make it simpler to understand the relation of the rights and to the extent of the education, we will use an example of book writer and publisher, as both of the individual are really close to education. Here, we will apply the two rights of ownership, namely the legal rights and secondly, the economic rights. As you can see on the slides, for the legal right, it will lead to the increasement of number of publisher and writer. Meanwhile, the economic right will lead to the increasement of educational material in the market. Here, the effect from these two will lead to a bigger access to the educational material. Indirectly, it will increase to the quality of education as people may retrieve such source of education easily from the market or even can be retrieved free without any charge from the author or the producer of the book itself. Lastly, we will discuss on the SDG 9, which is the innovation. In general, indirectly, the right of ownership can promote people towards innovation. In this case, as in this scenario, the one who hold the commercial right on the innovation can get a big return of profit if the innovation benefit to the people and can be marketed. So in terms of the moral right and the legal rights, it will encourage the people to innovate as others cannot steal their design easily. Here, others cannot copy or steal their work or design as it is protected under copyright law. Those who try to copy or steal, it can be brought to the civil or criminal action.